Good morning.
Good morning, Megan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, do you want to welcome everybody to our second show of Positively Special Ed?
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk today about um, some of the accommodations we make on a daily basis. As I stated the last show, I have a learning disability. It's called auditory processing, and we continue on a daily basis as children and as adults. Um, we make modifications both through technology, but also in analog.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
That sounds great. And just to reiterate from our last show, like you said, I also am diagnosed dyslexic. I was classified back when I was in second or third grade. I didn't really learn how to read proficiently until I was in about third grade. And one of the wonderful things about running into somebody like Megan and Amelia, who's not with us at the moment, is that I ran into these other adults that deal with the same kind of struggles that I do. And it wasn't until I met the two of you where I was really comfortable having an adult conversation of what it's like to be an adult or even a kid struggling and growing up with a learning disability. That's kind of like the history of our show and how we got started.
That is the history of our show. Yeah, and I think also what's super important is, um, you know, I'm probably gonna have kids at some point, and we know that it's genetic, and so being able to make a space where all of our kids can learn and not have to go through the trials and tribulations of being a kid with a learning disability throughout the school and throughout adulthood.
Yes, it's a good point that you bring up because I do have two kids, one who is classified, one who I think is going to get classified. And they both have very different kids and they both have very different issues. And it looks like my son seems to take very much after me in a lot of ways. However, he is extremely strong in math, which is totally unique to him. It has nothing to do with my husband or him. That's him. But he definitely is very similar to me. And just like we're saying, being a parent now of children that are going through this process, it's really important to be empowered as a parent and also to be able to take a step back and say, you know what, it's okay. They're going to learn differently. They are not going to be fitting in the mold as everybody else. But if you make that okay, if you make that as something like an everyday part of conversation, well, how do you learn? Then it's something that they will have a greater amount of self-acceptance about it.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that's really interesting. Like as an adult, now that I can say I have a learning disability, it's sort of so I was at a Passover. I was at a Seder last night, and we all had to read passages out loud, and I'm like sitting there. I'm like terrified. I'm trying to read before, I'm trying to read the paragraph before and like look it over. And I was freaking out. I was like, oh my God. I'm telling the host, I was like, yo, I don't know if I feel comfortable reading this whole thing out loud. Um, and she's like, do whatever. And so she's like, well, if people want to pass, they can pass. If they want to go, they can go. Because everybody at the table, it's like 15 people, have to read out loud. And so what was cool about it is that like I got to choose when I wanted to pass and when I wanted to read, which was like that. So I'm thinking about like what are the modifications that I make on a daily basis, right? And being able to one state like how you want to act and like do you want to read out loud or don't you want to read out loud, to have that option. And so I'm sitting there and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to read out loud. And there's this other girl there who is French and she's reading sentences out loud. So I was like, all right, I just gotta face it. And I just gotta read this out loud, even though I'm totally terrified. But I think being able to choose what you want and also have like and voicing that and then having the people around you to like support you in that. And I was also sitting next to my boyfriend who was so amazing. He's like, you don't even have to say pass. I'll just start. I'll just go. To like not make me not feel like
singled out.
Yeah, or that I even had to say anything, which was amazing.
So, that is amazing.
It is amazing. And then you also realize too, like everyone afterwards was like, I haven't read a paragraph out loud in a really long time.
That is so funny. That's really funny.
And so and I was like, okay, so maybe not. And like everybody had anxiety about this too, about like say like reading out loud, because when do we do it as adults? We're made to do it every single day. It's like a kid.
Right. Well, if you taught English, you read out loud a lot.
I was like, please.
And a funny modification that I do for that, actually, and I really do this. I mean, I honestly take a little business card or my finger, and I track under every single word that I read. I actually follow every single word that I read as I'm reading. And I think that that's something that's really useful for my students to see that I do that, because it's very easy to get, it's very easy for me to get lost in the text.
Well, you skip lines and stuff.
Yeah, I can skip lines. I can jump around if there's something. I don't know what part of this has to do with my disability or the visual aspect of it, which is pretty profound at times. Visually, I am very distracted by anything that's different. And so some people might see a mass of text and not perceive anything different. If there's like one kern spacing that's off between the two characters, my eyes are immediately drawn to it and I will go there.
I've heard that.
If there's any skip, even the most minute skip in a pattern, or one letter that is darker than the rest, my eyes go there before anything else. So I'm very easily visually distracted. So I'm also very, I talk about visual consumability all the time whenever I do trainings or professional development for my teachers. But I really do. I take a business card and I read out loud a lot, actually. So I use a business card or I use my finger, but I have to track.
And what do you call it again to your teachers?
Visual consumability.
Interesting.
So and when you think about visual consumability too, it really has a lot to do. This is a modification, not so much that we'd make as teachers, parents, but more so as teachers. If you've ever seen Erin Klein's show, she's got a blab as well, but she also has a Periscope show that she's done called Classroom Cribs. And she's got a background in interior design. And if you go to her blog and you see her classroom looks like a living room. It is not like one of those wild and crazy elementary school classrooms where just like everything is packed on the walls that you could possibly imagine, that there's a bulletin board every like foot. It's actually very muted. It is very chill and relaxed, and there's like couches and regular tables, and there's not a lot of posters. Everything is very visually consumable. And she said that she thinks that has a really big impact on her kids that can get set off by visual stimulation as well.
I agree, because I remember just being in a classroom and being like, there's so much to look at and to not pay attention to the teacher.
Yes, it really is. I mean, and if you're going, and I mean, we also have the worst lighting in the world for a classroom.
Oh.
Incandescent lighting is the way to go. So if you could bring in lamps, if you're allowed to do something like that, and mute the lighting a little bit, so it's not that, because you have a flicker rate in fluorescent lighting. The flicker rate exhausts the eyes. It's been known to happen. That's one of the reasons why you get tired when you look at a screen. The screen's got flicker rates too. So, and that's why when you like are videotaping somebody's screen or TV or computer screen, it looks like there's lines going through it. It's because there's a flicker rate behind that. Well, you have people that have visual disability, or that their learning disability is triggered by some kind of visual stimuli. Even though they may not be perceiving that it's happening, it is happening. So incandescent lighting, like I actually have this bad boy right here. Oh, this is an incandescent light that I have that I put right near my computer screen, so that way it actually helps negate some of the flicker rate that my eyes experience.
That's interesting. I would have never thought about that.
Yeah, it's one of those weird geek out things that I picked up on.
No, but it makes sense. It makes total sense. Like there's sometimes throughout the day when I'm at school, I just have to literally walk outside to like feel the light.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our kids need that too. I don't think they get that enough. I think they really could use that. I think it would be so great to have a lecture if you're able to plan it. Have a lecture or have part of a Socratic circle or something like that, and do it outside.
Yeah.
I think that
also, I remember when we would go outside, there was also too much stimulation. I was looking at the trees and at the leaves and feeling the grass in my feet.
Yeah, but it's great though. I mean, there's so much to connect to. So yeah, that visual part, we've kind of gotten on a visual thing. So another modification that we can make now, this is coming from a teacher. So a lot of us have smartboards. I don't know if you have a smartboard in your classroom, do you?
We do have smartboards in our classroom, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm also a smart notebook trainer, and one of the things that I picked up on while I was doing my trainings was that a lot of teachers might not consider if you have a colored background is best for your smart notebook presentations. If you have a white screen and black text on the white screen and black text and you're in the back, depending on the light saturation in your room, your students are not going to be able to see from the back all the text that's on the screen. So one of the best things that you can do is have a colored background. But if you have a colored background, you don't want a severely high contrast. You want it to still be muted. So some of the best colors I found for backgrounds that help mute that visual stimuli a little bit would be like a pale purple or a muted green. This color actually is not a bad color for a background as well. So yeah, so if you have a colored background for your smart notebook files, it's easier for kids to discern their text. So you could go for a white text there. You can go for a contrast text, meaning like if I was going for a very muted pale green background, I could use a purple text if I really wanted to, but I have to make sure that that they're not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not very intense colors. So I'm not going to go for any kind of neon or chartreuse or anything that has a really bright intensity to it, because that could also set off our kids that have any kind of visual stimulation as well.
Would have never thought that. And it was funny. I was in a class the other day, and one of the kids was like, "I can't read that," and the teacher was like, "Sure you can." And I was like, "No, dude, I literally can't even read it either." Like I'm sitting all the way in the back, and I really can't read.
Yeah.
And when the sun was hitting the board, like you just couldn't read it.
A lot of teachers don't, we are so swamped with the day that when we're doing our lessons, we're so used to just doing our lessons, like we develop our lessons and then we launch our lessons, but we don't practice our lessons. And unless it's like an observation that we're going through, we don't have the time really to put the screen up, to put Smart Notebook up and walk around our classroom and think, okay, is everybody going to be able to see this?
So then that's what you should ask. Can everybody see what I'm writing on the board?
Yes, but how many kids? You're going to have a bunch of kids that are never going to answer.
But
oh yeah, I can see it.
But at least there's an opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you absolutely should ask.
Like, what if you're sitting next to someone who's like, I can't see it, and you're like, thank God they said it.
I agree. I think it's really important to take in consideration all the different factors. So when we're speaking just visually, we have the different designs of Smart Notebook files. Then we have the design of the classroom, where I really totally think that if I were to ever go in the classroom again, my classroom would look so much different than it used to look. Like it would look much more like a living room than it would a traditional classroom. I might have a few framed posters, literally, and that's it. There would not be a ton of books everywhere, maybe a separate library. There would be relaxing chairs there. I would probably, if I was allowed to, have area rugs, make it more of like an innovative and relaxed space. I think that that also makes a big, big difference too in our kids.
I think I have a big map.
I love maps. I think, you know what'd be so great about maps though too, when you talk about it in ELA classroom or a background like that, it would be so great to have a map up and then just simply pin the map of where are the stories that we're reading, like where are they taking place? And just something as simple as that just crosses some of those connections for students. And then if you get into the whole ed tech thing, then we can just like look on it and Google Street View with cardboard, but then I'm going to go in my whole ed tech thing and I'm not going to go there right now.
No, actually, my boyfriend for my birthday, I've traveled like all over the world. And so my boyfriend for my birthday bought me this huge map where you can pin it, like pin where you've been. And so it says like the travels of Megan Hayden. And so we did.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah. You get to like pin everywhere I've been and then everywhere we've been together. So it's really nice.
I was thinking about doing that with my family, but we just haven't been that many places, so it would look a little sad.
Well, you could just do the state of like New York or the United States.
Yes, I haven't got my kids out of the U.S. yet, so we'll definitely see. So we have
that's something that's interesting. So my mother's from Peru, right, and she's a Spanish teacher, and what's happening now with students with learning disabilities, at least in my area of New Jersey, is they are having kids with learning disabilities opt out of language because they're like, well, if they can't understand the English language and it's too hard for kids to understand the English language, then they shouldn't learn another language. And so I swear to
oh my gosh.
So this is so.
Oh my gosh.
So my mom's like, well, like, no, my daughter's going to learn Spanish. And what ends up happening is that Spanish is actually, it's so easy for me to read because
it makes sense.
It makes sense. It sounds like what it's supposed to sound like. It's written like,
oh my gosh,
you're supposed to spell it out. So like, it's easier for me to read out loud in Spanish than it is in English. And so actually, one thing that's like super interesting is going back to those modifications is it's really about telling people your story, telling people how you learn. And so, and like, it opens up the world. So like, I can't with people, like my kids are all African American and they have the craziest names and I literally cannot spell them out because they're words that like I don't know how to sound out. Right, not phonetic.
Yeah.
And so, or sometimes it is more phonetic. It's just, so it's not phonetic. And so what ends up happening is I tell people that I've ended up, the way I read is because I've memorized every single word and then what it should sound like for every single word that exists that I can say. And so
I do the same. I had to do the same thing. That's how I learned how to read. Phonetically, I couldn't, which is a struggle that my son is having. We're going to have his CSE meeting on Tuesday. And that's one of the things that I'm really struggling with is that he's bombing his tests in a big way. And it's because he cannot understand what he's reading cognitively. He's still trying to break down the words. So he doesn't understand comprehension wise what he's supposed to be doing. So there's a lot. And I had, I requested some additional tests for him. I requested the CTOP, which is a comprehensive phonetical awareness test, and the LIST, which is another reading comprehension test. And both of which was really, really poor at. And I knew that was going to happen. And he's going to be the same way, just like you and me. It's going to have to be rote. It's just going to have to be rote. That's how he's going to have to learn his words. And I'm still the same way.
But as long as he knows that, like,
it doesn't make a difference.
Be able to sound out the words. It's just, and so something that I think is really important too is teaching our kids, like, one thing that a teacher was telling me about that I thought was a really good idea is to have like a word bank at the top right
Yes.
everything so that you don't learn how to spell things incorrectly.
Yeah.
Because it becomes habitual. Like literally that's what we see because that's what we think.
Okay, so this is a modification.
There's another modification.
There's a modification right here. I'm going to back up. This is a word wall. I've been meaning to do one for my son. I'm going to have to do one for 3rd grade. This is a kindergarten word wall. Take a look at this. This I totally got from a kindergarten teacher named Christina Taylor in Warwick Valley Central School District. She's an awesome kindergarten teacher. So she made this for all of her kids. All of her kids would put this up whenever it was time for them to write anything. So they would have this word wall up. She would have the different phonetic sounds, like she would have some digraphs. She would have vowel sounds here. And I intended, and I did not do it, and I do regret not doing it this year for my son for 2nd grade, but this is awesome. And so, and I completely forgot that I had this until you brought this up, but I could be putting this out for my daughter because this is age appropriate. So this is a modification.
What if you just have that in the office? Like,
I did.
Actually, look at this modification. Did you plan for this?
Right here? I just knew where it happened to be. But this modification is awesome.
It's incredible.
It doesn't matter if you've got a special ed kid or not.
Right.
Kids that are in the process of language acquisition, break this bad boy out. She just took, these are nothing more than just 2 folders that the teacher taped together, and she put these words from, what do we have? A to L, and then M to Y here. Where'd she put Z? They might not have been dealing with Z because there's so few letters that use it.
But that's so true because it's so funny even as an adult, right? So my one of my friends who's also dyslexic, his spelling is like, it's terrible, but it's phonetic. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, oh my God, he spells everything like so wrong. And then I was like, I can't believe I'm even saying that. Like, why does it matter? Why is spelling the thing that catches us as to like the person, right?
Right.
That's how we identify people and their strengths. It's like still through spelling.
I know, and it's so ironic too, because with voice recognition, the kind of technology that we have now, it is just not as imperative. I don't mean to take anything away from the skill of knowing how to properly express yourself. But when we're focusing on the measure of a person being on the mechanics, and when mechanics are the delivery of the mechanics, and that's really what it is, right? It's not about the mechanics of spelling. It's about how we're teaching spelling. When you have certain kids that cannot comprehend that type of mechanic, then what's the point? It's not an appropriate measure. Circumvent the mechanic and let the child express themselves.
Right, exactly.
So we have voice recognition. I mean, that's another modification. I think I spoke about that in our first show. I use voice recognition on my laptop quite frequently just to do my notes for my job. So I keep a log of all the work that I do in my districts. And the only ways I can do it quickly enough is simply by using voice recognition.
That's so smart. I never thought of that.
Oh yeah, I use voice recognition and dictation all the time. And when you're dealing with kids that are like us, and especially my son has an occupational therapy modification. His fine motor articulation in his hands is not where it needs to be. Plus, at 2nd grade, they don't know the keyboard. And if they don't have a proper tripod, you have some kids that when they're developing their tripods, you have some kids that are doing this. You have some kids that do this. And we're taught when you're teaching kindergarten that this is the most efficient way for a child to learn how to write. It's going to spare their energy in their arm. They won't get tired out. If you have kids in your classroom that are doing this, their hands are going to become exhausted much faster than a child who's tripoding correctly. So if you have a kid that can't even hold their pen the right way because they haven't developed all the muscles in here completely, use speech recognition, for crying out loud. They'll get there. Eventually, they're going to get there. They're going to grow. It will work.
It's right. It's just like it's like trying to use a tool that like you can't really use, like a pen. So why don't you use the tool that will get you to where you want to go? Like, why does it matter what the tool is? I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think it's really important that, as parents and as teachers, it's really important to realize, are we being what's the word I want to look for here? Are we being restrained by teaching the mechanic, or are we trying to release the concept? And the mechanic is phonemes. They have to be able to decode phonemes. They have to be, why?
Right.
We're breaking things. They don't have to do phonemes if they don't want to. You and I learned by rote memorization. I had to build off rote words, smaller root words. And I learned by whole language. I still can't sound things out.
But that's what was so interesting, like going back to the language and having a learning disability, is I know more words because I know Spanish.
Yes.
I mean, that's obvious, right? So like I can understand the concept of that word because I know another language, right? And so it's so crazy. So this is what they've done. So they have taken kids out of language because God forbid, like they could never learn another language, right? Mm-hmm. And because they don't understand English or can't understand English or can't process it quick enough. So how could they process another language? But then what they're doing is like a lot of colleges will not accept kids without a language.
So they have to take a language anyway to even get into the
right. So now kids, not only do they have a learning disability, now they have a smaller choice of colleges that will accept them because of not having the language.
That's crazy. It's just crazy because we're pigeonholing these children. And you said it a number of times. You said, how many entrepreneurs have learning disabilities?
1/3.
One-third of entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs these days, have a learning disability because they learned how to circumvent the mechanics, and now they play by their own rules.
Right. That's what I tell my kids every single day. I say, guess what? Life is a game. And I was like, you can either play it or you don't. And you know what happens when you don't? You lose. You just lose. I'm like, so, even for kids who blow up, and like I work in an urban school and my kids are just angry and they come from like crazy situations and they blow up. And I'm like, I've been reading this book called The Power of Habit, or The Power of Habit. And so I wanted to teach my kids, like, let's try this habit. How does it feel diffusing a situation rather than adding to the fire? And so I literally have them, like, what's the cue? The cue is they want to react. And then the action is them reacting, and the reward is the teacher yelling at them or like reacting to them. And so I have them understand that the cue is they want to blow up. The action now is saying you're sorry. And the reward is the teacher being happy with you. So like learning how to communicate for kids with learning disabilities and show them like, hey, look at how you acted in this one situation and look at the outcome. And I do that for them every single time to make sure that, like, it's so important to point out to students with learning disabilities, like when, especially with like executive dysfunction, like when are you not seeing the people's faces around you? When are you only in your own head being executive?
Yeah, can you define an executive dysfunction for anybody on that doesn't know what it is?
Oh, what's that?
Can you define executive dysfunction for anybody who's watching and doesn't know?
Executive dysfunction, the way I understand it, is we all don't actually develop we don't like develop that prefrontal cortex until we're about 21.
Yeah.
And it happened at 21, 22, 23, 24. And those skills that we develop are like organization, that deals with, it also deals with not reacting immediately, like almost having a filter. Other parts are also not being able to understand sort of social context and social cues, which happens to me all of the time, which I didn't even realize. Like, for instance, my boyfriend was like, so I have a peanut allergy, and we'd go out to dinner, and my boyfriend would be like, I would ask the waiter, I go, what do you cook your vegetable oil, or what do you cook your oil in, or your food in? What kind of oil? And they would say, and they'd look at me like really weird, and my boyfriend would say, why don't you just start off with, I have a peanut allergy. He's like, don't you see their faces? Like, they look all confused. Why do you not see that? And I think it's part of the executive dysfunction, where you're just not realizing sort of what you're saying or what you're doing or how other people are like reacting towards you.
Right. So it's like kind of we get stuck in our heads and we're not perceiving what's going on around us.
Yeah. That's executive dysfunction.
Yeah, I actually had a little bit of executive dysfunction acting up on me this week. I'll tell you, it's not one of those funny. It doesn't feel good when you have people going, wait, you didn't realize that this was happening and that these people were not happy, and you're like, no.
That's something that I thought was super interesting. So like, people with executive dysfunction, it overlaps into like many different things. So you can have Asperger's, like it's also on the spectrum of autism. It's also on the spectrum of ADD, because I feel like learning disabilities, we are a spectrum because a lot of things overlap.
Yes.
And so something that I thought was really interesting was, I think a lot of people in my life have sort of like let me just be who I am and not really say like, that's like not normal, right? But like, why didn't anyone tell me? So like, I've gone my whole life thinking that what I'm doing is totally normal. Like, and I'm like, guys, nobody really. So I think it's just hilarious. Like, so now with my kids, who like one of my kids is he has Asperger's, and when he does things or says things, I'll be like, what you said is really rude.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, well, I didn't mean it that way. And I'm like, well, it was. I'm like, it's very hurtful. And he goes, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. And I was like, all right. So now you just like, you have to become aware of sort of what you're doing and your actions. So it makes me become more aware too.
So going back to our modification strand. So then what you're saying is that the habit building is one of the modifications that you've been trying to employ with your kids.
And myself.
I'm telling you right now, and we talked about doing this, and I think we need to do a habit challenge, because I know that we've had this conversation before. Part of my disability, one of the strengths of my disability, is that I can have a bunch of plates spinning all at the same time. And that I actually think like I'm like always in these different ways. And like you had mentioned before when we talked, people with learning disabilities that are functioning on the same level that we are actually make really good doctors, are really good in positions where there are a lot of wheels spinning, because somehow we're able to keep touch on a lot of those things.
But what's so cool about a dyslexic brain, here's the strengths that they don't tell us about. It's like,
yes, let's talk about it.
Right. Just positively special ed. Like, we have some really amazing strengths. One of our strengths is that in a dyslexic brain, you scan the brain and you look at the place where we understand complex systems, and that like shines, it like lights up. Non-dyslexic, there's no shining. There's no So so literally they're like, so they were saying like, why are we the mechanics, it goes back to the mechanics. Why are we testing these kids and not allowing them to become engineers? Like complex system, doctors, the body, complex system.
Yes.
It's all about the mechanics. And it's like, what actually one guy from my hometown, I don't even know him, but I met his wife, and she runs Decoding Dyslexia, and he's a veterinarian, and he would have to practice on the animal, like, or same thing with this orthopedic doctor who was totally dyslexic, but he said he went down to the cadaver, and that's how he like worked on learning what he needed to learn, not through the books. So he changed his mechanic, right? He changed the tool in which to learn. So I'm like, I would rather have a surgery from an orthopedic doctor who was working on the body and not just like reading a book about the body.
You know, that's the same thing. And I know we have different experiences with that, but I can also speak to that too. And you know, bursting autism. Yeah, she was talking about dual processing in the brain. Like and Megan knows, my terminology is I have a hyperlinked mind. I am constantly, there's a bunch of rabbit holes in my mind that I will go down. Eventually I meander my way back to what my original thing is. But I need that. That's just the way I think. So, but one of the things that comes to mind too is like our teaching certification tests in New York. This is a really unique experience, right? So if you're in the classroom, you know that there is no test you can take, none, that will measure your ability to be in front of a class. It is
or manage a class.
Right. It is a do or die situation. You either have classroom management or you don't. There is nothing you can do really to test that besides being in front of a class and having a cooperating teacher who hopefully is very successful with classroom management. If you want to read something, you want to read Harry Wong's First Day of Schools, is awesome. You want to read Teach Like a Champion by Doug Lemov. Those are amazing protocols, amazing ways to manage and actually interact with your students. That's where you want to go. But there are no tests that measure that kind of proficiency. Yeah. So when I was doing, I'm certified ed tech, I'm certified elementary, I'm certified secondary English, and I'm certified administrator.
Dang,
none of those tests.
Dang, girl, and you got a learning disability.
None of those tests, not one of them, do I feel actually portrayed the role that I had. None of them. And the ironic thing was I took the K-12 English test and I took the elementary ed, they're called content specialty tests. So I took those content specialty tests in the same day, 6 hours of testing. Oh my God. So the ironic thing was on those tests, I think there was 2 or 3 of the exact same question on the elementary ed as there was in the secondary English. And the exact same question. I actually jotted it down on my notes and I was like, oh my God, the second time I saw them, I just answered these questions. What are questions that you would use in a secondary English setting doing in an elementary test? And it's just so ridiculous. There's just no measure. And just like you said, you know, you have these people that have hyperlinked minds. We're able to understand complex systems, but we can't take the tests or the MCAT or the GRE to go into a program to study what we really want to study.
Right.
So it's pretty.
But it's the same thing. It's like it's always like we're always put in a box. And like one of my kids was saying, he was like 21. He's like, oh, you know, they always try to put me in a box, but I'm a circle man. I was like, oh my God. And because I run Process This, which is the organization that I started, I was like, that's gonna be the logo. And I called him and I was like, I love symbols, so I looked up what the symbol meant. A circle, or there's a box inside of the circle, and I was like, oh my God, this means the soul. And I called him up. He's like a lax bro, you know, he called him up and he's like, oh yeah, it means the soul. And he's 21, you know, from a fraternity. I was like, how do you know what the soul symbol is and you're dyslexic? Like, there's all these beautiful connections that I think that students who are dyslexic have these like way big, I just see like they have this infinite mind that like we forget to realize.
I completely agree. And I also, you know, it just was thinking as we were talking about, we put them into boxes. Again, going back to the concept of teaching foreign language to kids that have learning disabilities. All right. So I'm just going to get on my soapbox here and just say that the English language makes absolutely no sense. No sense whatsoever. If you take a look at Spanish, if you take a look at Chinese, all right, now I have not learned Spanish proficiently. I can speak Mandarin, and I'm telling you right now that Mandarin makes a heck of a lot more sense than the English language does.
Well, everything's a symbol.
Counting, it makes more sense. So in the English language, we have 0 through 9, and then we have 10, then we have 11, then we have 12, then we have 13. There's these new words for something that is simply the number 10 plus a bunch of ones.
Right.
In Chinese, it's not like that. So if you have, you know, if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's 1 through 10. And sure is 10. And then guess what? 11 is sure E, and 12 is sure R. It is 10 plus 1, 10 plus 2, 10 plus 3.
Same thing in Spanish too.
Yeah, same thing in Spanish. And then when you get to the 20s, instead of 10 plus, it's actually 2 times the 10. So it'll be Arsher is 20. Sansher is 30. So sure is the 10, and then you have the increment of the 10. It makes so much more sense. It's just crazy. When I started learning Mandarin, and then I started learning about grammar, and I understood it for the first time in my life. I understood grammar better than I had when I was trying to learn English.
I know, it's like a backwards way.
And it is backwards because, again, the way that you learn Spanish and the way that you learn Chinese, the way that we arrange our nouns and our verbs and our subjects is contrary to how a lot of other languages do it. Well, why are we doing it like that?
It's right. It's structured totally different. But thank you, Bursting with Autism, that, you know, our education system needs more outside of the box thinkers. And I think that something that was really cool, one of my teachers, she's just like, I'm just so interested in learning disabilities, and I found this dyslexic simulator, and she showed it to me, right?
Where is it? Drop that link, baby. I want to see it.
Oh, I gotta find it. I'll drop it. And so she sent it to me, and she was like, I love this one because it allowed me to I couldn't outsmart this dyslexic simulator. And so it made me think, like, is that what everyone's like trying to do? Is like outsmart?
Yes. People are trying to teach us not to be dyslexic instead of people trying to show us how to rock dyslexia.
Right. And I thought that was so cool. Like, but she was like, she's like, I'm an empathetic person. Like, I want to experience that. I want to like really, really understand it. And she's like, I couldn't outsmart this one. And she's like, and it made me, she's like, usually you can read it and like, I can read through it, even if everything's a little backwards. But this one allowed me to not be able to read it and to try to decode it, and like for every single word. And just even having that conversation about that was so interesting. You talk about empathy, right? You talk about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, how they learn, how they read. And like, even to my friends, I was like, oh, I found this dyslexic simulator, even though I'm not dyslexic, even though I have a learning disability, even though it's not like yours. And I showed it to you, and they were like, yeah, this is exactly how it feels. This is exactly how it looks. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was it. I just think that we all have to like tell our stories, because it's so important in order to tell the story. Like, you have to tell the stories.
you do have to tell stories. And I think that we need to be able to draw these lines and connections for people. And I love talking about this stuff with you so much. It's so much fun. It really, really is. Yeah, you know what? I think you're right, Bursting. It's been so hard for us to try and get our act together. But once Megan and I get going, we just don't want to stop. So I think we're gonna have to.
I would look up at the time. I was like, it's 10:30.
Yeah, I know. It's like, no, it can't be done. But we have to do some evening ones because and I really think that we have a lot of stuff to share because it's really, really important. I mean, this whole show was just talking about different modifications or different approaches that we've made or that we can make as teachers. But it's so rich and it's such a dense topic. And Megan really touched on it, is that we're trying to teach these kids. Instead of trying to teach kids how to overcome a learning disability, how about we try and teach them how to rock their learning disability? How about we try and teach them to be students of how they learn? If they know how they learn, then they can communicate it with us. And if they know how they learn, then they can go ahead and be successful in any adventure they want to do. But if I don't have their paradigm, I am not going to be able to help them. The only thing I can do is coach them and ask them, does this make sense to you? If it doesn't feel right, let's bag it. Let's try something different.
I had one of this principal. Once you start having these conversations with educators, it's like it's so amazing. This one principal said, I was talking to him about learning disabilities and telling him that I had one, and he's asking me all these questions. He's really interested. Yes. People are interested. And he goes, what if we created a project where everyone had to research their learning disability and then they had to present their learning disability as a lesson plan in the way that they would want to learn it?
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Or teach it, right? So if you're a kid with learning disability, if you're dyslexic, how would you teach a classroom?
One of the things that I think is really cool, I have a friend of mine, her name is Heidi Bernasconi. She is, her handle is @BioBernasconi on Twitter. She's a phenomenal educator. To my knowledge, she does not have a learning disability. But one of the first things that she does whenever she starts the school year is she has the kids take an assessment and an assessment on how they learn best. Right. And then knowing how they learn best, the kids go about and they actually curate most of their content for their classes and they create their curriculum. Yeah, I know she's like ridiculous. Like I wish I could just sit in her classroom and just watch her work. We should have her as a guest one day because, and she also does 20-time projects now with all of her kids, and her kids are all just doing their own learning in their own way, deciding their own projects. So, I mean, she's like one of those teachers that bursting autism, that we're talking about, is that she's one of those people that advocates, I'm here as a coach. You got to do legwork. You got to figure out how you learn best. And I'm here to coach you with that. Okay. So anyway, she's somebody that would definitely be worthwhile bringing in because of that, that she really advocates the students learning how they learn. And that's really important. I think that we all do that. I also I'm going to see if I can find it. Something that's really...
Yeah, at Bursting just shared some really...
Go ahead, read that.
Out loud?
Yeah.
My son is 6 years old, nonverbal, and is about to enter kindergarten. His assessments indicated that he is at a 6-month level in terms of behavior and development. I heard this yesterday and sat in my car and cried and cried.
Oh, that's so hard.
I just think that is what we're meant to feel, but I think it was really interesting. My friend, I went to the Seder yesterday, and I was my friend was telling me that she's teaching 2-year-olds, and she was saying that she teaches 2-year-olds to dance and how to plant, right? And so through dance, she says, all right, what do we do when we plant this? Like when we plant something, we have the seeds and we have to put the seeds, and she's like doing all these movements, the seeds in the ground. And then we have to and then the rain comes down, and these 2-year-olds are learning about, like, they know so much. Like to say that a 6-year-old is at a 6-month level, there's so much that your child has to offer in terms of being present, of being just being a person in this life. I don't know. And I think, and I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, it is so hard. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, Bursting, is that these assessments that we give our kids, like my son has just been measured a bunch of times. We have a CSE meeting on Tuesday. I've requested more tests because he's not getting the services he needs insofar as his reading. He's got wonderful teachers. He's got in a wonderful school district, and he's in a great building. I have no qualms at all about the support that they've deemed that he gets, but he needs more. But again, these tests
are the mechanics.
That's right. It is not the full picture. And we have to keep that in mind, that these tests are only designed to measure the mechanics and not the overall concept, and not the motivations, and not the character of the child. So
and the growth, and like not the growth in the places that it matters.
Right. So your child right now you could be looking at a test right now that's saying that your child's on a 6-month developmental level. And by adulthood, your child could be a hero for his cause. There's nothing on a test that's going to define what he's going to do or who he's going to be. And that's one of the things that Megan and I constantly are talking about, is just that, when I was classified, my school wanted to pull me out and put me in a school for special kids. And it was everything that my single mother could do. And the only reason why she was able to do it was because a tutor that specialized in learning disabilities took pity on my mom, because we were both on welfare and we had no money, no resources. She took me on for free for several years. The only thing that stopped us was one knowledgeable person. So it's really hard. It's really, really hard to navigate that and keep your hopes up. But I would just send hugs to you and just say, please keep your hopes up. It will work out. It's just that these tests are so inadequate as a measure. I also put
and they're made to like not, they're literally, there's no strength. Like is what I love about Jen, is that you talk about strengths all the time. Like, where are the strength tests?
I just dropped one.
I know you just dropped it.
Yes, I dropped one.
So it's like, where are the strength tests in education? There are none.
That's what we need. That's so what we need.
You're trying to find a baseline as to like, right, where are we the worst?
Right.
And so how do we rise?
Right. So I think that, Megan, check that. I did the Gallup strength test and I did the more general one. I'll probably do the more in-depth one. But it says, like, these are your strengths. And then it actually has people who display the same strengths. So for each strength that I have, they give you your top 5 strengths. For each strength that you have, they interview a person that has that top 5 strength, what role they do, what work they do. And it's funny.
Get better. It's so cool.
It's really good.
I totally did that. I did that too after you told me to do this. I got futuristic, activator, positively, self-assurance, and command.
Yeah, totally see that with all of you. Let me see. I forgot what I got. Let me go back to my Strength Center thing here. My top 5 strengths are individualization, connectedness. I am a learner, I am an arranger, and I am an activator.
Ooh. Well, at least we both got activators.
Yes. Fist bump. Yes. Well, and that's what we're doing, right? That's exactly what we're doing right here. We have a voice and we want to talk about these things. And it's so funny as an arranger because I just put in I just finished 2 weeks ago. This is one of those things that my dyslexia lends itself to, is I just coordinated my fourth conference is coming up, but it's a really small one. I just planned my biggest conference. I had 406 attendees. I had 40 superintendents. I had 34 vendors. I had 2 keynote speakers. I had 36 breakout sessions. And if you would have told me back in high school, when I could not even graduate because of my math grades, my teachers just gave it to me. And my teachers just gave it to me in college too. I did not pull the grades to be able to graduate. It was a gift. If you would have told me back then that I would be capable of doing what I do now, that I run a blog, that I run a consultancy, that I can speak in front of large groups of people, that I can coordinate an entire conference, that I can do professional development for entire districts and help them plan their professional development plans, I would have said there's no way possible, because I was being pigeonholed and nobody was able to take a moment, because nobody knew how to examine your strengths. Nobody was able to take a look at, me and see that I had this rapid fire brain that would go off in a lot of different directions. So how can we harness that and make use of it?
Right. It's awesome.
It is kind of awesome. It's frustrating though. Like last night, I have to say, I was crying over something that had to do with my learning disability. So it's awesome, and it's still frustrating. So just to share.
It's so funny because my friend said, Amelia, she goes, I just kind of can't imagine being a person without a learning disability. Like, what does it feel like to not have one?
I don't know. Like,
I have no idea. But I also know, like, that I don't think I would want it. Like, I don't think I would want to be really without a learning disability.
There are some times when I really wish I didn't have one. Like last night, for example, it's silly, but it's so true. So last night, I came home. We're doing a radon test in our house. And the last time we did the radon test, it was left out too long. And last night, and again, my mind is in so many different places all at the same time. Now, this could be learning disability. This could also be motherhood. I have no idea. But I think they play together really well. They play in the sandbox. They ping off each other. So I get home and I go downstairs and I cover up the radon tests and I put them in the box. My husband comes home and he says, wait a minute. We just talked about this last night. I said I was going to take care of this. They had to they had to cook for another day. Why did you do that? And I'm like, well, I didn't remember that. I remembered that they were left out for too long. And the last time, and I was taking care of this. And he goes, yeah, but we just talked about this last night. Don't you remember? I'm like, obviously I don't remember.
I'm not doing this on purpose. I was just trying to help.
Yes. And that was the whole thing. And it was that, and it was also something at work with submitting my timesheets properly, because there's so many, the little minutia gets overlooked so frequently, or I err in a subtle way with it because there's a lot of other bigger plates that are spinning, because I can keep them all going. But sometimes there's a stumble. So, and that is definitely one of those things. And I said before, with some of my dysfunction, with time frames is a big one. And so this being a time frame issue, this is one of those things that, I do get really frustrated at times. And I cried last night over it, because I was just like, why? Why can't I just deal with time frames well? And I'm highly organized, but the whole time frame thing, I'll either add time onto it or I take time away from it. And a very common dysfunction of mine is that, and I think I said this to you before, I add a half hour to appointments, or I deduct a half hour to my appointments.
Only work
all the time. If I try to remember them, I will remember it wrong. I need to put it in a calendar, because you'll tell me 12 o'clock, I hear 12:30. Or you'll tell me it's either that, or you'll tell me 12:30 and I'll think 12 o'clock.
My boyfriend said it was so funny. We were driving the other day. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I really want to understand how your brain works, because you do things. He is like, you'll do something, the same thing, but you'll do it 500 different ways. Like, you'll never do it the same ever for anything. And it was this, like, I was also like driving and it said like, don't enter. And I just like went there. Like, road closed, and I just like wanted to go towards like the place that I knew. I shouldn't go, or like it's like I just like didn't read it right, or like it doesn't register.
It's like you visually see it, but you don't cognitively understand what you're seeing. And that happens to me a lot, where I'll look at something and it looks like a picture, but it doesn't register in my mind that there's words to that picture saying don't
right, that will make me react in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the processing. You're so right.
Yeah, it is one of those things. It's like a picture. It happens to me.
And then, like, your life is like telling you to like not go down that road, but you still go down it. It's ridiculous.
You can't explain it to somebody who doesn't have it, that sometimes when you're reading something or when you're looking at something, you see the object, you acknowledge the object is there, but you don't perceive what it's conveying. And that's the crazy thing about the processing issue for me. So my issue with processing also is, yeah, exactly, Bursting. It just doesn't register. You acknowledge it, but it doesn't register sometimes. And when you try to tell somebody who processes it on the grand scheme of things, like everybody else, I don't even want to say normal, because it's not normal. It's just what the mass does. They don't understand that I just saw something. I could see it. I acknowledge its presence, but I didn't comprehend it. And it's not. And people actually think
it's about comprehending and then acting.
Yeah.
So like, right, there's like a cue of seeing something and we see it, but we don't like realize that we have to read it to then act. So we just don't. It's so hard to try and describe that, but that is a constant thing that I see all the time in my own manifestation of my disability. For sure.
Yeah. And people are
like, I got towed the other day. I was like, look at the sign. Like the sign doesn't even make any sense. There's like 4 o'clock, like 4 to 6 o'clock is a tow zone. Like it's a tow zone. And then underneath that, like from 8 to 12, you can park there, or from 8 to 4, you can park there. And so I'm like looking, I understand that a sign means that I'm supposed to read it and that there's red. That should probably tell me that I shouldn't be parking there.
All right, the most important signs for you, honey, are the stop sign, which I'm fairly sure you will.
No, because no, stop signs, fine. Tow zones, that's like a $300 inconvenience, and like a $300, like you're like, hold on, so you stole my car, I have to pay you $300. I didn't register the sign. I couldn't register. I didn't read the sign.
And it's the registering it, though, that's so important that people don't get. Like, for crying out loud, I am a certified secondary English teacher, and I've also taught kindergarten, and I've been a teacher for 20 years this September. And when I tell you that there are times when I look at something and I can acknowledge it and I don't register what it says, I'm not doing it on purpose. I do not look like a freaking idiot.
No, I do not want to be in this position. Whatever position I'm in, I don't feel like being in it.
Yeah, and people look like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, what, you want me to write you a list?
Oh my goodness.
A dissertation on what's wrong with me. We got a talk show on it.
Well, we should start wrapping up because it is 10:40.
Yes, it is 10:40, but this has been so much fun. So just to recap, some of the things that we were talking about in this episode of Positively Special Ed were the modifications that we make on a regular basis as adults, as teachers, for our kids. So some of the topics we talked about were visual consumability. So if you're in a classroom with kids that really get a lot of it, there's any kind of indication of visual stimulation, I would suggest adding incandescent lighting towards that child, which means like a lamp, like something like this, because it reduces the flicker rate, or it kind of negates some of the flicker rate of the fluorescent lights. If you're using Smart Notebook, you want to use a muted background to give contrast. If you have a white background and black text on a Smart Notebook, it's going to get lost in the background for the kids. What were some stuff that you were talking about, Megan?
I wanted to just follow up with thinking about the mechanics of our lives, right? Yeah. Of every day, of the mechanics of how we live, what tools we use, why do we use them, are they necessary? And I think that that's how you have to start thinking about your kids and the kids, like the kids that I teach, and also your own kids and the people around you, is the mechanic that important?
Yes. Great question.
Not.
It's not.
It's not.
It's really not. The mechanic of breaking down phonemes is not that important.
No.
Unfortunately, I mean, when it comes down to like, if a child's going to be inhibited by the mechanic and they're not going to create, then give them some other way to create.
Exactly. And that's something that I have my kids do for their templates when they write to their teachers. They say, my strength is doing things with my hands or building something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that these are not necessarily strengths that are inside the classroom, but I'm hoping that I can bring it in the classroom and build something that describes the book we're reading. And so if teachers can understand that, then maybe the mechanic you begin to show a teacher a new mechanic.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I completely agree. And I think that's the thing is teachers, it's education reform, nothing new. And it always starts in the classroom before it starts anywhere else. So,
right.
It's actually asking us to ask other teachers, can you step away from the mechanic and take a look at the whole concept? What's the end game here? Is the end game the test? Or is the end game this child being able to create and become an expressive contributor to the rest of the society?
Yeah. So.
All right. That was a great session.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. Fist bump.
All right. I'm gonna pause our recording. Thank you so much for joining us on Positively Special Ed. And I'm not sure when our next show is, but I have a feeling it's going to probably be pretty soon.
Yep. Maybe next Saturday.
Hey, or maybe we can go for a nighttime. Try and find a nighttime one that we can do sometime. Because I think Bursting with Autism was absolutely right that we'd probably get more participation. All right, so that's it.